Thanks for downloading this episode of the Resilient Advisor Podcast. My name is Jay Coulter, and today we are going to discuss how communication has changed and most financial advisors have not, and where that presents an opportunity for you as a financial advisor. Joining me is Matt Halloran, who is a partner at Top Advisor Marketing. He has spent over 20 years in the industry and is the author of the Social Media Handbook for Financial Advisors, as well as a co-host of the podcast, Top Advisor Marketing. Matt, thanks so much for coming on.
It's an absolute pleasure. Thanks, Jay.
All right. I love your podcast. You guys bring on really engaging guests. You do a fantastic job interviewing, which I can really appreciate being on this side of the microphone.
Yep.
You guys also recently put out a series that I'd love to talk about, and that's where you went through the 7 dynamic prospecting techniques. And I'm going to include links to that in the show notes. Advisors, I highly encourage you to subscribe to the Top Advisor Marketing Podcast, and particularly take a look at that series that they put out. So, Matt, I'd almost like to turn it over to you, and maybe you could start walking us through those 7 techniques.
Thanks, Jay. And by the way, for your listeners who didn't listen to you on our podcast, they should go ahead and dive in and find your podcast. That was one of the best podcasts, especially from a social media standpoint, that you as a podcast guest, better than any other social media person we've had on. So I really appreciate your thought leadership. And this is a huge testimonial. I think this podcast is like rock star level podcast. You content is amazing. And it really does piggyback into what we're talking about today, which is the 7 dynamic digital prospecting tactics, because you're a master at it already. So I'm really interested in what your feedback is on what we came up with as these kind of 7 points.
Actually, you're too kind. Way too kind. Let's dig into it. What is the first thing that advisors need to be thinking about as it relates to prospecting digitally?
Right. So it's boosting your connections on LinkedIn. So LinkedIn is probably one of the greatest tools that you can have, but you really need to be focusing on who's on LinkedIn instead of what you want to be on LinkedIn. And what that is centers of influence. When you do a post on LinkedIn specifically, we recommend that you tag some of the centers of influence that you're already connected with on LinkedIn. Then that whatever that post is going to hopefully create engagement with that center of influence, and it's also going to show up on that center of influence's page. What we're finding is the conversation tags back and forth, and Jay, I'm actually interested in how you're seeing this. But we've got a couple of strategic partners who tag us and stuff all the time. And when we start going back and forth on LinkedIn and having conversations, we're getting thousands of views, all sorts of likes. But tagging other people on LinkedIn is a wonderful prospecting tactic. What do you think?
So this is very timely. I've been testing this here recently. I have, when I've launched a podcast, put it on LinkedIn, and I would tag the guest. We would see some engagement. Just last month, I started producing a monthly note, which is a summary of what I see working in the marketplace from a technology and investment perspective, as well as a summary of the podcast. And in the note on LinkedIn, I tagged all the guests and all the companies that I reviewed, and it went exponential.
Yeah.
So I agree with you. Bringing that engagement to your post really, really drives a lot of views.
Well, I'm glad that we're on the same page with that one. Now, tactic number 2 is doing exactly what you and I are doing right now, which is to be a guest on somebody else's podcast. I was telling Jay when we were kind of warming up for this that this is really weird for me because I'm generally not on this side of the microphone. I'm the one on the other side of the mic. But be on other people's podcasts. It's fantastic. If you've got a center of influence or even somebody in the community, which is even better, give them a call and say, hey, I would love to have an opportunity to be on your podcast, because podcasters love to have guests. I mean, Jay, you love to have guests. I love to have guests. It just increases your reach. A lot of times it brings stuff to the table that isn't normally brought out on your podcast. So that's tactic number 2 is try to get on somebody else's podcast. And here's the kicker. You don't always have to talk about finance. You don't have to talk about investments or financial planning or anything, but maybe you just talk about being a local business owner, or maybe it's there's a podcast for a local nonprofit that you're really passionate about. Do that. Be on the podcast. That way it's a lot easier from a compliance standpoint, but then also when it's compliance approved, you post that on your social media, and then you tag the host of that podcast and the company, and then you're going to get that exponentially increase, just like Jay talked about with tactic number 1.
So, Matt, at least twice a week, sometimes 3 or 4, I receive a LinkedIn connection request. And at the very top, in all caps, it'll say, interview me. It's almost like there's a marketing company out there doing this for people. And then it'll be a short message as to why they need to be on my podcast. It never works. I never invite those folks on.
It never works. That's great.
It never works. Now, I'll give you another example. So someone reached out to me that's recently been on the podcast several months ago, and they said, hey, I think we could create a mutually beneficial piece of content that I could help market for you as well. And I invited them on the podcast. They delivered great value to my audience, and then we were both out spreading the content. Do you have any best practices for advisors to craft that message so it's better than these folks who are just spamming with interview me?
Well, first off, I would never do that through LinkedIn, right? That there's a level of personal touch that would need to be involved. So for me and for what we would recommend is this sounds old school, but I'd pick up the phone.
I love it.
And they can hear you. If you have a terrible voice, or if you are saying ums and ohs and so's and all the stuff that drive you and I crazy so much, they're going to figure that out very quickly on the phone. So I just say you need to pick up the phone. Hey, I've been listening to your podcast. Make sure you name the podcast. And especially if you can reference one of the podcasts that you liked more than others, or just to highlight to show that you're paying attention. I would love to have an opportunity to be on your podcast. And then you just kind of throw that out there and you're casting your line out into the water and then you see what happens.
I love it. Great advice. All right. So what's your third technique?
Well, we think you should start your own podcast. Podcasting isn't for everybody, but it's for a lot of people. Financial services professionals talk for a living, Jay. That's what they do. Most of them are terrible writers, and most of them really stink on camera. Not to be mean, but I could share hundreds of advisor websites where the advisor's on camera. They paid $5,000 to $7,000 for, a 3-minute video, which, by the way, is too long. Talking about how wonderful they are, and they look like they're terribly constipated or they're terrified. Podcasting is great because I have a face for radio, so I can do whatever I want behind this microphone. You can't see me. It's just super, super easy. So obviously, this is a little shamelessly self-promoting because we actually have a podcasting service offering for financial services professionals, but we also have a free white paper, and I'm going to make sure you get this. It's how to start your own financial podcast. And it's every single solitary thing down to equipment, technology, technique, format, everything for free. If you want to start your own financial services podcast, get your thought leadership out. That's tactic number 3.
I will include a link to that in the show notes. For folks that are driving and just aren't going to go to the show notes, where could they find that on your website?
So that's under the free resources section on topadvisormarketing.com.
Excellent. And then from a high level perspective, if they were to engage you and your team to launch a podcast, what is the start to launch timeframe and what is their commitment?
Oh, wonderful. Okay, great question. So the start to launch time frame is about 30 days. And the reason why is because we create everything for them. We build their podcast channel, podcast logos, podcast graphics, narratives. We get them plugged into the syndication service, which is the same one that I think you use. So it syndicates to Podbean, iTunes, SoundCloud, all of those different places. Alexa now, by the way, is one of the ones. You can say, listen to Top Advisor Marketing Podcast on Alexa, and it actually brings up our podcast. It's really pretty cool. And then we also buy the equipment for the advisor. So we want to make sure that you sound great. So we buy you a specific kind of microphone. Depending on if you're going to have guests, we buy you a specific kind of mixer. And then the time commitment for the advisor is only 2 hours a month.
How is that possible? I spend 6 hours an episode.
Well, mostly because it's extemporaneous. Now, I know that might sound strange, but we really try to teach and coach our advisors that this is just meant to be a conversation. And so something, we'll pick a topic, and I'll give you a great example. I have one of my clients, the podcast is called Invest with Clarity, and he'll call me up on Skype like we are right now, and he'll say, Matt, we're going to talk about investment policy statements. Are you ready? And I've been doing this for a long time, Jay. I mean, I can talk about investment policy statements till your eyes are bleeding, or ears in this matter. And so we just talk. Hey, we're going to talk about investment policy statements today. Hey, what do you want to talk about? And then bam, 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 bam. Now we do have some advisors that spend far and away too much time preparing, but you can tell, right? It's very rote. It's very stiff. Podcasting is supposed to be casual, in my opinion. Organized but casual.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. I need to get my time commitment per episode down. Sounds like I could learn a thing or two from that white paper.
Yeah, it really is a great resource. And honestly, Jay, we should probably just set a call aside and we need to talk about some trade secrets, because there are a couple of things that you do that I wish we did better. So, since we are, podcast friends here, I think we should try to help each other out.
Excellent. All right. So what is the next technique for our listeners?
This one is a little bit more a larger pill for advisors to swallow, which is to become a Facebook influencer. Because it has to do with frequency of posting, but we have a schedule. So this is how it works. Mondays, you're going to do a community post talking about what's going on this week, what you were involved with, maybe what happened in the past weekend. Tuesday, you're going to do an expertise post. So that's going to be something about your podcast, your white paper, an article that you've written, a blog post, maybe a reference to a webinar. You got Wednesday, which is a personal interest story. We like to have you keep this really, really quick, short, a quote of somebody that you absolutely love, a personal or family or team achievement or thought of the day. Thursday, influencer expertise. Once again, so that's where you're going to be able to talk about who you are, what you do, and what makes you unique and different. And then our favorite is Fact Friday. So you always put out a weird fact, something that could be really obscure, maybe even something obscure in the financial services market. But we have found that if you stick to a very specific format, people love it because they understand it. They're going to be looking for your Friday fact every week. Now, it takes a little while for this to to gain ground, but this is how you can become a Facebook influencer.
And is that a service that your company helps advisors execute?
Absolutely. So we have our podcasting and social package. So we take those podcasts, the 2 podcasts that I was talking about per month, that's the 2 hours of the advisor's time. And then we turn those podcasts into 100 social media posts. So our team will follow formats like this for financial services professionals.
So anybody listening who has the idea they're going to do this on their own, I've been doing it on my own for years now, and it takes an inordinate amount of time. And the ability to outsource that, not only is it a lot of value, it just gives you so much time back into your day. What is the experience like for an advisor that reaches out to you and they want to do can they do the social media program without the podcast?
Not really, unless they're active bloggers or they have their own radio show or they're writing a lot, because content is king, right? And it has to be their content. That's what separates our service from everybody else's is those 100 social media posts are your thought leadership. And from an SEO perspective, you know that, Jay. I mean, that's what social media loves. But so the experience, it's terrifying. I'm just going to be honest. Most advisors are utterly terrified because they're rescinding control in a medium in which they're not comfortable with anyway. And it usually takes them about 45 days. And then afterwards, I just got a message from one of our clients and one of our team members. Her name is Jessica, and she's one of our rock stars. We've hired 3 women who have their master's degree in digital media and communication and journalism. That's actually a class that they take in Toronto or a master's program. So these women are they're the best of the best. And this client of ours was like, I don't know how Jessica does it, but she makes every post sound like it came from us. And that we cannot get a better compliment than that. That was super awesome. And I'm really proud of her. She's a rock star for us.
Wow. Great service. So,
yeah.
All right. So what's the next technique? I forget. What are we up to now?
We're number 5.
All right.
Yep, number 5. So this is white papers. So white paper engagement. This is one of the more people are starting to do this. So I don't necessarily think this is as nebulous or as distant as some of the other topics that we're talking about. But white papers are really important. Kirk and I have done podcasts on white papers, how to write a white paper. We also have another free download. It's called The Anatomy of a White Paper. I'll make sure you get that. And it walks you through how to write a white paper. People love white papers. They love how easily digestible they are. Most of them are top 10 lists, top 5 concerns, so they're very easy. And if you do it correctly, what you'll do is you'll talk about it on your podcast, you talk about it on social, and then they'll have to go to a landing page on your website, put in their email information to download the white paper, which, by the way, is totally socially accepted now. So that's not as taboo as it once was. And then you're able to get that white paper. Then you put them into a nurture sequence, or you put them into a drip sequence.
So I'm with you on white papers. I've seen them be highly effective in the independent space because they can write their own papers. Mm-hmm. What about the wirehouse advisor who isn't able to create their own content per se, but they do have some resources that their firm puts out. Is there utility in those guys using those?
It just doesn't work as well socially. We have a saying in our firm. It's called pleasing the algorithm. And that is our mantra. So my whole social media team, all we try to do is please the algorithm. And my team's job is to consistently look at how the algorithm changes in order to adapt our posts to please the algorithm. The larger companies that have a lot stronger control over the brand standards, which is what you're talking about, right? And the message standards, they just don't show up. You're going to have to pay for it. So if you're a big wirehouse producer and you're making money hand over fist, and you do have a great paper from your wirehouse, you're going to need to pay for that to show up, unlike what our clients do, which is organically reach them. Gotcha.
Okay, number 6.
Blogging. It's amazing to me how many people don't do this. Blogging has been around for 15 years now. I remember when I had my first MySpace page. That'll show you how old I am. That blogging started getting really big there. WordPress came out. Everybody was WordPress blogging. Make them short, sweet, and to the point, but please pay for somebody to edit it, whether that's somebody in-house. You can outsource editing. There's great websites like Fiverr, Upwork, a whole bunch of different outsourcing services, maybe an English teacher that but you have to make sure it's grammatically correct, because your blog is going to get blown up if it's not right. But it is a great totally free way to get your thought leadership out. And again, from an SEO perspective, the internet and social media loves it.
All right. So this is a selfish question. I have not blogged until this past month, where I started a monthly, I call it the Resilient Advisor Note, which is a summary of what I see working from technology, what I'm hearing in the investment space, and podcast. I mentioned it earlier. And God, it took me a lot of time to do. How long do these need to be, and how much time should advisors allocate to it?
That's a really loaded. See, what you're doing, I would say, would take longer than what an advisor should be doing, because you're really covering an enormous amount of territory there, Jay. That's an important focus. If you're spending more than 90 minutes per month on your blog, you're overthinking it.
Okay. 300
words. It's a pretty good size blog.
So 90 minutes blogging, 2 hours podcasting is a really good marketing base. Is that fair?
It is, yes. And so if you're doing that all by yourself, then yeah, that's really, but we need to take one other step. So how many hours a day are you on social?
Too many some weeks, and other weeks I just turn it off.
Right. I have to do that too, man. Before I had a whole team, right? So Top Advisor Marketing has really kind of exploded with team and growth. I was spending anywhere from 45 to 90 minutes on social per day. Now, understand, I did write a book on social media, and I'm very active on social media, but you have to be on at least 30 minutes. So you start adding up that time, right? So 30 minutes and that includes weekends. Sitting with my coffee, iPad open, wishing people happy birthdays, that sort of stuff. I love that, because I want to make my connections feel special, because then they like being connected with me, right? Everybody likes to be wished happy birthday. So anyway, that's, time is money. And you, as a financial services professional, if you're producing your own podcast, double the time. So you're looking at 4 hours to be able to produce, edit, and syndicate your podcast. You're looking at 90 minutes a month, for your blog. And then 30, well, really more like 45 minutes to an hour a day managing your social. And just, go ahead and take those numbers and multiply $250 an hour. And then your head will explode, and then you'll give us a call.
I tell you, this long in the tooth bull market has really made advisors complacent as it relates to their marketing. And I think they forget, in the mid 90s, when I was sitting in a bullpen at Dean Witter, I spent all day marketing. Yeah. And to get folks to go and spend an hour to a day or a week right now is like pulling teeth, and I'm sure you've experienced it. Would you say it's fair that the advisors that get ahead of the curve now, start laying the groundwork, start laying that brand, are going to be in a better spot come the next market downturn? Yeah.
You should be spending 2 hours a day marketing. That's just Chet Holmes, The Ultimate Sales Machine, which is a great freaking book. He says a real salesman spends 2 to 2.5 hours prospecting new people every single solitary day. That, you're right. I mean, you don't have to do any work. The market keeps going up.
Yep.
No. Now, what goes up, as you know, is going to have to come down. And the higher it goes up, I'm terrified that it's going to become a really big, yucky, messy mess here. But here's where all of this can be taken. Your clients will take it very, very differently. Number one, if you're not always talking about performance, and if you have a good financial planning process and a good investment management process, yes, it's going to sting, but it's not going to kill your relationship. And if you wait until all hell breaks loose to start communicating and podcasting, the ramp up time for your content to be assimilated is going to be 3 to 6 months. And that's I should have said that earlier. If you start a podcast, if you start a blog, if you start getting on social media massively, you need to understand it takes 3 to 6 months for you to really start seeing engagement. So we don't know what's going to happen in 3 to 6 months. You might as well start this today just in case something happens in a couple of months.
And I got to tell you, Matt, and this isn't to promote your company. Based on my experience, if you're doing it yourself, it takes a lot longer than 6 months. Yeah. I mean, it took, both of my podcasts took well over a year to get any kind of traction whatsoever. Yeah. So, all right. So number 7.
Yep. So this one is, so we're obviously wrap up with this today with the 7 dynamic digital tactics, but this is a viral content campaign. I was just, Kirk and I went to the SEI Top Producer Conference a month ago and met with a young woman. Her name is Heather Wilson. She runs social media for SEI. And she's a rock star. This woman's just amazing and really, really knows her stuff. Actually, she might be a great guest for you, but we might want to talk about that. Anyway, when I asked her, I said, Heather, what's the number one thing that you wish advisors would do on social media? And she said, listen. And the whole room went dead, like dumbfounded dead. And I said, well, you explain that. She said, well, it's always like advisors are talking at people, but they're not talking with people. And viral content is the best way to do this, because if something is viral, and I'm not talking about, some cat video, what I'm talking about is an article that is getting an enormous amount of traction. If you respond to that with your own comments, that's when people start realizing that you're listening and paying attention. This is the easiest tactic that we have because it takes little to no time at all. All you have to do is go on Google and ask Google or Alexa or Siri or whatever, what are the top 10 trending news stories right now? Kerblamo, those 10 come up. You pick one of them, and that's what you write something about. Super, super powerful. It's a great opportunity to get your thought leadership out.
I love it. I with the exception of doing the Google search for the top article, I've taken the same approach and started coaching our advisor clients who are reluctant to get on social media, LinkedIn, Facebook, just to use it as a listening post. And sometimes that's the nice first step for them to start engaging on social media. It's great advice.
We call them lurkers, right? And not necessarily stalkers, because lurking is different, right? But that's exactly right. If you don't know what your audience needs, then what are you going to put out, right? I mean, you and I can sit in our ivory towers and tell them what to do, and we know, but it's better for them to learn themselves.
Matt, this has been an incredibly informative podcast. Tell our listeners how they can find out a little bit more about you and the services that your team offers.
Well, first off, Jay, thank you very much for this opportunity. I know that my guests, when they're on, are always a little bit nervous. And I'll be honest with you, I've been podcasting for a long time. But when I'm not in charge of the podcast, I had a couple little butterflies here, man. You made me feel super comfortable. And I thank you so much for having me on. I think you do a great job. And what you're just adding great value. All people have to do is go to topadvisormarketing.com. All of our stuff is right there. Actually, all you have to do is scroll down to the bottom of the page. We offer 3 major services: branding, social media, podcasting, and a new service called the Certified Digital Marketing Assistant, which is where we teach your marketing assistant how to do what my team does when you pay us a halfway decent amount of money. So basically in-house the work instead of outsource it. But listen to our podcast. A Top Advisor Marketing podcast, we're putting out 1 to 2 of those a week now. That's my primary job. We try to provide as much value as we can. They're not salesy at all. Our goal is to just expose people like we did with you, Jay. I mean, we wanted the industry to know who you are and what you do, because what you do is so great and important, that you're the kind of guest, you're the kind of ideal client that we have on the Top Advisor Marketing Podcast. So those two things would be absolutely fantastic. And we're going to give you the links in the show notes to the white papers that I talked about today. And we'd love to help anybody we can.
Excellent. Matt, thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you, Jay.